Virginia's environment advocates and policymakers have access to our upcoming environmental policy goals. As with each year, the agenda has been crafted with over 100, with participation from our 150 plus network partners. We have 38 issued papers this year. I'm pretty excited. So each Thursday, I apologize, in October and the first week of November, from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m., the Our Common Agenda education series will highlight the state-based policy recommendations throughout the 5 chapters of VCN's briefing book. These chapters are clean water and flood resilience, land and wildlife conservation, land use and transportation, climate and energy, and finally, good governance. Each Thursday, we'll be joined by authors from these policy papers. Today, we'll be covering the climate and energy chapter. Once again, best viewing experience, click the view button on the top right corner. And if you need closed captioning, that is on the bottom right corner of your screen, kind of in the middle. But without further ado, I'll pass it to Narissa Turner.
Thank you, Kyle. So as Kyle just said, I'm Narissa Turner, and as many of you may know, I am the Climate and Clean Energy Policy and Program Manager here with the Virginia Conservation Network. And I have the honor today of introducing some of the authors of the clean energy section of the Common Agenda this year. So first off, starting with renewable energy and energy efficiency, we'll hear from Nate Benforado with the Southern Environmental Law Center on the things we need to do to maintain and realize our clean energy transformation in Virginia. Next, we'll hear from Lena Lewis with the Nature Conservancy, and she will be talking to us about the importance of energy efficiency. Then we'll have Kendl Kobbervig with Clean Virginia to talk to us about advancing both affordable and equitable clean energy transformation. And last, but certainly not least, we'll have Emily Piontek with Appalachian Voices to talk to us about making sure that we do utility scale solar right. At the end of this section, there will be time for questions. So just remember, if you've got questions based on anything you hear from this first slate of authors, just throw them in the Q&A section, which I believe we have, or in the Q&A section, and I will get to those at the end of this section. And with that, Nate.
Good morning. Thanks, Narissa. Nate Benforado at the Southern Environmental Law Center. Let's see if I can share my screen here. Okay, hopefully that's working. So yes, I want to present on realizing our clean energy transition. In 2020, thanks to many efforts of people who are here on this call presenting and also listening, we passed 2 historic pieces of legislation. The first is the Virginia Clean Economy Act, and then the second is the law that required Virginia to start participating in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. The 2 laws are complementary, and both are really critical to our energy future. I'll start with RGGI. RGGI has a long and proven track record of reducing carbon dioxide pollution from power plants. This is a tool we need to make sure that power plants are steadily reducing emissions over time, and we are not the first to join, and we know it works. The Clean Economy Act then lays out a pathway to get us to a carbon-free electricity system by 2050. So the Clean Economy Act is more focused on the build out. How do we ramp up our renewable and clean energy? It works to maximize energy efficiency programs, build out the solar and wind and batteries we need to have a resilient and affordable grid, and ultimately make sure we retire fossil fuel generation at the end of that process. We need these laws. Without RGGI, over the last decade, our power plant emissions have not declined. Meanwhile, RGGI states saw their power plant emissions drop by at least 30%, and they realized billions of dollars in public health benefits, because with lower emissions comes improved public health, fewer days missed from school and work, fewer asthma attacks, premature births. And we're already starting to see results in Virginia. Our emissions are starting to drop. And we're also, through the RGGI auctions, are bringing in millions of dollars in critical funding, funding to help low-income households reduce their energy bills, improve their indoor air quality, and also funding to help localities do resiliency planning and projects. We're seeing recurrent flooding all over the state, both on the coast and in inland communities. And there's really no alternative for this funding at this point. Contrary to what we've been hearing from the governor's office, the Clean Economy Act is the pathway that's set out in the Clean Economy Act is affordable, it's reliable, it's cost effective, and it's flexible. We know things can change over time, and nothing in the Clean Economy Act will somehow preclude or prevent innovation from happening. But it focuses on proven resources like solar and wind and batteries that we know work, whose prices have fallen dramatically and continue to fall. And in fact, laws like the Clean Economy Act are attracting business to Virginia. You know, the Lego recently announced a facility in Chesterfield, which is going to bring in 1,700 jobs, and chose Virginia specifically because of our clean energy statutes. Now, last session, these laws came under attack, the 2022 session. There were full repeal attempts. There were proposals to weaken them in certain ways. And we know that these attempts are going to come back in this session. We need to hold the line once again. We know how important these programs are. We know opponents of the program are ramping up their messaging and their talking points, and frankly, misinformation campaign about what these laws do and require. Of course, we will want to advance other measures, and you're going to hear a lot about some of those other measures that are sort of more offensively minded. But, you know, and you're going to hear about some of those later this morning. But in the meantime, we need to make sure we hold the line on these really historic achievements, the Clean Economy Act and Virginia's participation in RGGI. So I'll thank you and look forward to answering questions at the end of this session.
Thanks, Nate. Next, we'll have Lena.
Thank you. And let me share my screen. Oh, but I think, Nate, you need to stop sharing your screen first.
Okay, I am trying to do that. There we go. Sorry about that.
Okay, so and now I'm trying to start sharing our in-slide presentation. Major technical challenges here, but we can do this. Okay, so I'm Lena Lewis, and I was one of the co-authors on this paper on creating jobs and savings with energy efficiency, along with my co-authors Laura Gonzalez with clean energy, Blair St. Ledger Olson with the Climate Cabinet, and Mary Stewart Torbeck with the Sierra Club. And when we say energy efficiency, we do not mean turning down your thermostat in the winter and sitting freezing cold in your living room. Energy efficiency really means achieving the same or better results through technology while using less energy. So you're going to save money and lower pollution and live with the same or better comfort and results as you did before. So energy efficiency is a really wonderful solution for both lowering our energy bills and also lowering our pollution. As it is, Virginians are just wasting so much of the energy that we buy. They're probably wasting at least 17% of the energy that we purchase. both through inefficient appliances and not having sufficient insulation on our buildings. And yet, energy efficiency is a huge job creator. As it is, energy efficiency is employing over 73,000 Virginians. That's more than any other portion of the power sector. And if we had more energy efficiency, we would create more jobs for Virginians that cannot be exported out of state or overseas. So if it's so great, why aren't we already maximizing our energy efficiency? Well, there are barriers, and I've put some of them here. The biggest one is probably upfront costs. Energy efficiency is an investment and it pays for itself. And then you start saving money, but not everybody has the money upfront to upgrade their HVAC system or to upgrade their buildings. And that's especially true for low and moderate income households. The best time to make a building energy efficient is when it's being built, and yet builders have an incentive to lower their construction costs. And one of the ways they do that is by excluding energy efficiency measures that would lower the long-term costs for homeowners on their energy bills. And another biggie is that utility companies are in a position to help their customers save money on their energy bills through energy efficiency, and yet utilities have the incentive to sell as much energy efficiency as possible, or sorry, to sell as much energy as possible. And so we need policy to overcome these challenges. So just want to point out 3 policies. We have more in our paper, but one, as Nate talked about, is to stay in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or RGGI. The Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative generates revenue along with reducing pollution. And half of that revenue in Virginia goes towards programs for low-income households to improve their energy efficiency. And this is desperately needed in Virginia. There's no other source that's going to fill that gap if we lose RGGI in Virginia. So that's really important. Secondly, as Nate mentioned, another portion of the VCEA is improving energy efficiency. And the big tool for that is the Energy Efficiency Resource Standard. I won't get into the details of that now, but we need to keep it and strengthen it. It creates incentives for utilities to help their customers be more energy efficient, sets targets every year for utilities to create more savings for their customers in energy, and we need for those targets to keep increasing for years to come. And the third policy relates to beneficial electrification. Beneficial electrification means switching from fossil fuel powered appliances, things like gas powered furnaces and gas powered water heaters, to more efficient electric water heaters and heat pumps, in cases where it helps the residents save money and improves, in some cases, improves their health for the conditions inside their home. And we need to have policies that make it very clear that our utilities can help make that happen when it's better for the residents. And so those are just a few of the avenues available for us in energy efficiency. And with that, I will turn it over to Kendl Kobbervig. And I will try to figure out how to stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Lena. Okay, let's see if I can share mine. Okay. Okay, yeah, so as Lena said, my name is Kendl Kobbervig. I'm the Advocacy and Organizing Manager at Clean Virginia. And this year in the Common Agenda, I co-authored a paper titled Advancing an Affordable and Equitable Clean Energy Transition, along with Emily Piontek at Appalachian Voices and Joy Loving at the Climate Action Alliance of the Valley. So I'm going to ask folks to bear with me a little bit because we're going to get a little bit technical because we're going to kind of dive into like the utility regulation structure in Virginia because, you know, Virginia is poised to be the first southern state to make a massive and historic transition to a clean energy thanks to the 2020 passage of the Virginia Clean Economy Act. But unfortunately, there are a number of current state laws that actually stand in the way of ensuring that this clean energy transition is also affordable and equitable for all Virginians. So specifically, state laws are set up so that utility profits are tied to how much they spend, which means, of course, that they are incentivized to spend as much as possible rather than to prioritize cost-saving measures for customers. Current state laws are also set up so that utilities can pass along 100% of fuel costs to customers, meaning, as Lena actually just mentioned, there is no incentive for energy efficiency. And what we've seen just in the past couple of months is that because of the skyrocketing prices of natural gas and other fossil fuels, Dominion Energy customer bills have gone up by about $15 a month starting in July in order to cover the rising costs of fossil fuels. And then Appalachian Power Company customer bills will go up by as much as $30 a month by the end of the year, also to cover fuel costs. Additionally, since 2007, utilities have been able to pile additional fees onto customer bills using a cost recovery mechanism called a rate adjustment clause, or RACs. And RACs have very quickly become the preferred profit-making tool of utilities in Virginia because they come with forced approval from regulators, and they guarantee 100% cost and profit recovery for utilities for projects. And so what we've seen is that since 2007, since they were introduced, RACs are actually responsible for 66% of net customer bill increases since then. And then finally, laws prevent regulators from lowering rates and fully refunding customers when utilities overcharge. And what I mean by that is that utilities are investor-owned utilities, so Dominion Energy and Appalachian Power Company have a regulator established profit level. And so when they overcharge customers above that profit level, they're in an ideal world, that money would be going back to customers and then rates would be lowered so that in the future, those overcharges weren't happening. But right now the laws don't really allow regulators to kind of correct the system. And to just kind of put a point on it, there was a report released by the State Corporation Commission, which is the utility regulator in Virginia, just about a month ago, that showed that in 2021 alone, Dominion Energy actually overcharged customers by about $151 million. So it's a pretty serious problem when you're talking about energy affordability. And as a result of kind of all of these different sort of rate making rules, Virginians actually pay some of the highest electric bills in the country. In fact, 3 in 4 households in Virginia face unaffordable electric bills, and that burden disproportionately falls on low-income, Black, Hispanic, Native American, and older adult households. So what are these solutions? So obviously the clean energy transition really does provide this incredible opportunity to ensure that all Virginians have access to affordable and renewable energy. But first, we need to prioritize passing laws to equip regulators with tools to more fairly balance the interests of utilities and customers. So some of these measures include restoring the State Corporation Commission, or the SCC's, authority to reduce rates when utilities will profit above their authorized profit level, which we saw just in 2021. Additionally, we need to restore the SCC's authority to determine the most cost-effective recovery mechanism for utility spending, because, as I mentioned, this newer cost recovery mechanism of RACs comes with forced approval. So right now, regulators actually cannot deny utilities from using that as a way to recover costs. Additionally, this one seems like kind of a no-brainer, but when utilities overcharge customers, it should be required that they refund 100% of those overcharges, which unfortunately right now is not the case, but it definitely could be. And then sort of these more concrete near-term regulatory reforms really need to be paired with a longer-term shift towards environmental and social outcome-driven profit incentives if we are to have a truly equitable clean energy transition in Virginia. So specifically, states like Connecticut, Illinois, North Carolina, and Washington have all passed laws that connect utility profits with societal goals like decarbonization and energy efficiency. We've also seen other states, most recently Hawaii, advanced measures that hold utilities accountable for fuel costs by splitting the risks associated with fossil fuel price volatility between utilities and customers. So passing more immediate regulatory reform measures while also exploring sort of longer term alternative structures that connect profits to customer benefits and societal goals will help ensure that the transition to clean energy in Virginia is affordable and equitable for everyone.
And last but not least, Emily.
Oh, I'm muted. Hello, everyone. Give me just one moment and I will share my screen. Okay, can you all see that?
Yep.
Awesome. So my name is Emily Piontek. I'm the Energy Democracy Field Coordinator with Appalachian Voices, and I'm here to present that paper, Getting It Right with Utility Scale Solar. I want to thank my co-authors on this paper, who include Bob Shippey of the Sierra Club, Patrick Fanning of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, and Kate Wofford from the Alliance for the Shenandoah Valley. So as you all may be aware, the Virginia Clean Economy Act calls for a transition to 100% clean energy by 2045 and 2050 for our two largest utilities. And this is going to require 16,000 megawatts of solar development. It's expected that this development will use up about 120,000 acres of land in Virginia. And so this, there are some concerns about the environmental impacts of that development, and that's what we tried to address in this paper. The VCEA mandates necessitate a rapid clean energy deployment. And so this means that many localities and areas in Virginia will be facing solar applications for the first time, and that the people who are reviewing these applications may have limited experience with the solar development process. So concerns have arisen related to this transition, including the effect of this development on rural livelihoods and rural economies. Building utility scale solar, so these really large projects can involve cutting down trees and removing topsoil. And so with that development, you'll have your requisite climate, air, and water quality, climate, soil, and water quality impacts. And so, as I mentioned before, in this paper, we were trying to address some of the concerns, and those concerns include land use change. So in these rural areas in particular, where you maybe have an agricultural or forestry economy, seeing that shift to energy production. There's also some concern related to the compaction of soil and water quality issues that happens when you are removing the topsoil and building these large farms. And then, as I mentioned before, there are also concerns with inadequacies in the local planning and zoning processes. Very few localities have solar ordinances to help guide that solar development to mitigate some negative impacts. And then just in general, people are facing these applications for the first time. So it's important, we think, that this amount of solar development includes rigorous environmental reviews. That way we can mitigate and avoid some of these negative impacts. And we also want to make sure that the permitting and development process involves state agencies, local governments, and affected community members to ensure that, again, the negative impacts are minimized and as many benefits as possible are realized in those communities and in the Commonwealth generally. A little background. So right now, a lot of, we have what's called a permit by rule process. And so solar projects that are 150 megawatts or less can go through this permit by rule process, which is a fast-tracked, kind of streamlined permitting process. But when you consider that for each megawatt of solar development, you can expect about 5 to 10 acres of land use. That means that for one of these fast-tracked permits, you can have hundreds of acres being affected by the project. And so it's just really important that we have rigorous environmental reviews for those PBR projects, as they're called. So what can we do to minimize the negative impacts and maximize benefits for Virginia? That's where we have our policy recommendations. This first bullet here is basically about locating solar development as much as is possible on previously degraded or developed land like brownfields. In 2020, Virginia passed the oh my gosh, I always forget the name. We call it the Brightfields. We call it the Build the Brightfields Act, but it's the Brownfields and Renewable Energy Grant Program. Since 2020, this program has been unfunded, although the bill called for $35 million to be put into the fund with matching state and federal money. And so this would be used to incentivize solar on some of this previously degraded land. And right now, as I mentioned, that's unfunded. So one of our recommendations for 2023 is to make sure that we fund that project or that program, and that we remove restrictions on it that limit funding sources. For example, that requirement that state money be matched by federal money, just so we can get some money in there and get those projects off the ground. The next three bullets have to do with development on, or the environmental impacts of development. So, looking at the current minimum standards for erosion and sediment control and stormwater management that DEQ has, and making sure that those are specific to this type of solar development. The next two bullets, developing regulations to minimize impacts and mitigate any impacts on prime ag, soils, and forest lands, are recommendations that came out of a bill from the 2022 General Assembly session that was put forward by Delegate Webert. And this bill called for the DEQ to convene a stakeholder group, which is currently underway. And folks who are participating in that group are helping to put forward some recommendations on both protecting soil and water quality by, deciding where we need to avoid solar development, where we should be incentivizing it in these areas, and then putting forth some standards for mitigating any adverse impacts that result from solar development in the prime ag, soils, and forest regions. And then the final two recommendations just have to do with ensuring that state agencies are equipped to support solar development. And so one of those ways that we think state agencies could do that is by receiving funding to implement agrivoltaic pilots. So this is looking at how we can co-locate solar projects with agriculture. And so maybe, incentivizing some of those pilot projects throughout Virginia, just so we can get a better understanding of what's feasible for farmers here and what would also benefit the growth of solar. And then finally, just additional funding and support for state agencies so that they can be working with localities who have questions about solar development and need a better understanding of the process and how such development would impact their locality. So again, those are our recommendations. I'd be happy to answer any questions. And thanks to my co-authors. Thanks y'all for listening.
And thank you, Emily, for being here. Emily, if you wouldn't mind, stop there. Thank you. Perfect. So we have one, I guess it's not necessarily a question that hasn't been addressed yet, but I will encourage folks to look at some of the questions that have already been answered by Lena. Thank you, Lena, having to do with energy efficiency and I think one on solar. But the only one that has not been addressed yet is please comment on the move to put small nuclear reactors on coal mine land in Southwest Virginia. I know I personally have some thoughts regarding this, but I think I first want to open it up to the panelists to see if they had any thoughts they wanted to share on this specifically.
I'll say a few things. So this is what the question is referring to is the governor's energy plan that came out. And there appears to be a big push to build a small modular nuclear reactor in Southwest Virginia. We have not really discussed this amongst the community. But what I will say is, and there's a lot of questions about what this proposal is. Are they proposing to have a utility build it? Is it going to be privately funded? But what I will say just about the technology, of course, it's does not produce carbon dioxide pollution. That's great, but nuclear does have a lot of environmental impacts beyond just the carbon dioxide pollution. But really, kind of foremost, if the administration is kind of complaining, and I don't know if it's a fair complaint about sort of cost and innovation, this is not a good use of dollars. Now, if it's utility dollars, that's a big concern. Utility customer dollars, that's a big concern. If it's private dollars, well, then private investment can lose a lot of money on it. These small modular nuclear reactors have never been produced at scale. They are incredibly expensive for what you get in return. And so right now it's much more of a theory and would cost a lot of money for the amount of electricity it produces. My personal view, again, we have not really reached consensus in the community on this. Whatever money would be a lot better spent on wind, solar, and batteries, which don't have any of those negative environmental impacts and are way cheaper right now.
Thanks, Nate. I couldn't have said it better myself. Would anyone else, any of the other panelists, like to add anything? All right, hearing none, we can move on to the next question. Emphasis seems to be just solar. What about wind for Virginia? I also have thoughts on this, but once again, I'll open it up to panelists to see if they would like to make any comments first.
I'll just mention, there's a big focus on offshore wind. So, in Virginia, it's not the same as the Midwest where you can put a wind turbine anywhere and get good production out of it. So onshore wind typically has to be on ridge lines. And there's questions about sort of impact to sensitive areas, impact to natural areas, and all that. So there's questions there. So a lot of our focus has been on the offshore wind angle, and that's under development. There's an active case at the SEC right now about kind of how much it's going to cost and building it out. So it's not that there's no emphasis on wind. I think particularly offshore wind is a key part of our future in Virginia.
Thanks, Nate. Keeping an eye on time, really quick, and then we have to move on.
Yeah, just that, the biggest wind potential on land in Virginia is in the Appalachians, but the Appalachians are a key climate migration corridor. We need the connectivity in the Appalachians for our species to be able to adapt, to move north and up in order to be able to survive climate change. So we at the Nature Conservancy do not want to be putting wind turbines in the Appalachians.
I think that's a good point. Thanks, Lena. All right, keeping us moving. We're going on to our next section within the renewable energy section of our common agenda, and that is fossil fuel and mining infrastructure. We have two papers here, both being presented by Jess Sims of Appalachian Voices, and that is Preventing Pipeline Harms and Protecting Our Water from Metals Mining. Take it away, Jess.
Thanks so much. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today to talk about these two issues. So let me share my screen. And hopefully y'all are seeing that. So I'm talking today about extractive industries that impact the Commonwealth, its residents, its ecosystems, its health and future. The first one I'm discussing today is preventing pipeline harms. This is an issue which has been constant in years in Virginia. And I want to thank the authors of this page, Peter Anderson of Appalachian Voices, Connor Kish of the Sierra Club Virginia chapter, and David Sly of Wild Virginia. So our transition to a just and equitable clean energy future is fully curtailed by the construction of new fossil fuel infrastructure. And although we've seen significant progress towards policies that prioritize clean renewable energy sources, like provisions of the Clean Economy Act, and laws which improve accountability measures like Senator McClellan's 2021 Pipeline Accountability, Oversight, and Protection of Virginia's Water Act, and Senator Deed's Adverse Impacts to Water Quality and Stop Work Orders law from 2021, we know that Virginia will continue to add increased greenhouse gas emissions if this infrastructure expands. That expansion is at odds with a healthy future for the Commonwealth, and it runs counter to critical climate mitigation measures recommended by those in the science field, those in our field that are concerned with the environment, and including the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Water and air pollution from fossil fuel infrastructure impedes the historic goals that we have tried to set in our state laws, and the resulting harms tend to fall disproportionately on Black, Indigenous, low-income, and elderly communities within the Commonwealth. We have a lot to learn from in our past couple years, as we've seen poorly planned and constructed fracked gas pipeline projects harm our fragile water resources and ecosystems, most especially in Southwest Virginia. And we've seen that those facilities are associated with the emission of methane, a potent greenhouse gas, which poses serious consequences to the climate. So ultimately, Virginia communities bear the brunt of negative public health impacts to water and air quality, often along with economic harm to farmland and other critical agricultural lands. Representative of the overbuilding and inappropriate siting of pipeline projects is the Mountain Valley Pipeline, which is a 42-inch fracked gas proposed pipeline that runs 303 miles from West Virginia into Virginia and would increase damage to waterways and private water sources in Southwest Virginia should any further construction continue. The project was originally proposed in 2014. Its necessity was questioned at that time and continues to be this day. So since it was permitted and construction began, we have seen that Mountain Valley Pipeline has wrought significant harm on local environments, damaged indigenous cultural and sacred sites, and negatively impacted rural communities and residents' livelihoods. At this time, Mountain Valley Pipeline again lacks necessary federal authorizations from the Fish and Wildlife Service, the Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, and Army Corps. But we've seen the project rack up over 350 violations in Virginia, for which the company has been cited and fined. And we know that if it were operational, it has the potential to emit greenhouse gases on a scale comparable to 19 coal-fired power plants. The MVP has been more recently part of the national conversation as federal attempts to circumvent its review processes and greenlight permissions without judicial review recently failed in the Senate. So Appalachian Voices and partners want to extend our deepest thanks to all of those who continue to oppose this harmful project. As we're thinking of other challenges within Virginia, we have new expansion projects. An example of that is the Virginia Reliability Project proposed for Eastern Virginia and the Hampton Roads area, which also produces concerns about air quality and emissions and responsible use and management of energy sources. But there are concerns about construction through areas overburdened already with existing infrastructure or pollution, the effects on wetlands, especially in areas prone to recurrent flooding exacerbated by climate change, and the negative impacts to private wells and springs are of great concern. So as we're looking to solutions, we know fossil fuels are the energy of Virginia's past, not the future. And given the steps necessary to mitigate the climate crisis and to have a robust clean energy future for Virginia, new infrastructure should not be pursued. We know from MVP, although laws are being strengthened, current laws and regulations do not necessarily adequately protect water resources, our health, or our environment. So absent a ban, any new fossil fuel build out, so this is for interstate crossing from another state into Virginia or intrastate for a line that is wholly in Virginia, must be thoroughly scrutinized to the fullest extent possible and actively and genuinely engage the public's views and interests. Fossil fuel projects should always have a comprehensive review, as should any energy project. And understanding cumulative health and environmental impacts on communities is a must. So for projects that are already underway, enforcing pollution laws must be prioritized, and polluters must be held fully accountable, regardless of the project's completion or if they've abandoned the project. We can also identify other gaps that leave Virginia footing the bill by recommending that bonding and restoration requirements and permit applications happen for fossil fuel projects, and that the requirement for the specific water protection permit for these projects, which currently is required for pipes of diameter 36 inches and above, be reduced to 24. Additionally, we've seen, as pictured here, Mountain Valley Pipeline. Karst landscapes in Virginia are especially vulnerable to damage from construction, and so our final recommendation is prohibiting new fossil fuel construction in areas of karst. So we're really looking to improve existing laws on the books, and then identify some specific ways to prevent further harm. And as we head into our second sort of topic of extractive industry that's harming Virginia, we are on protecting our water from metals mining. This is the second year that this page has been presented, and I want to thank the authors, Patrick Fanning of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, Stephanie Rinaldi of Friends of Buckingham, and I was the final author on this one. So we've seen a Canadian exploratory company who has come to Virginia and begun looking for spots where copper, zinc, gold, and lead are in abundance within the Commonwealth. So Virginia has a lot of historic metals mining, but never in a large scale production format. And that is what this company is trying to entice mining companies. So this is an exploratory company that would try and make Virginia look very attractive to mining companies to come here and have large scale mines. That could include an open pit or just another large scale mine below the surface. But as it stands right now, there is no comprehensive regulatory framework for operations of that scale. And that puts the public health and the environment at risk. Threats are from surface and groundwater contamination, and the remediation of negative impacts is not going to really be possible if the regulations are outdated. So we saw it for just a second, and we'll go back to that image, but there's a large gold pyrite belt, if you're not familiar, which stretches pretty much the height of the Commonwealth from Fairfax to Halifax counties. It contains things like iron, copper, zinc, gold, lead, pyrite. It crosses the James River. So this is a major point of concern. If we were to open up this industry at such a large scale, how it would impact not only the communities living right nearby, but our water resources. And the James provides drinking water for 2.7 million people. It brings millions of dollars into our economy from commercial fishing and attracts 6 million visitors annually. It also, the belt itself, intersects Virginia communities, many of which are environmental justice communities, often overburdened with existing pollution. So simply put, this expanded industry and the potential harm it could bring could impact a huge part of the Commonwealth's population. So we know too, another challenge and a major concern is that metal mining is an extreme toxic polluter. It's the nation's #1 toxic polluter. It's land intensive. It can involve the use of cyanide. The mining procedures can result in acid mine drainage, catastrophic waste containment failures, like a dam failure, a tailings dam. The construction of these mining sites can result in the destruction of cultural heritage and the devastation of local economies. And that's a result of the boom and bust cycle of that industry. So as the Commonwealth spends millions to restore the Chesapeake Bay, our southern rivers, and reduce sediment pollution discharges across the watershed, it's really something that threatens that viability should we introduce something new. So we've got some great solutions that are happening, and one of those has already begun. I'll also mention too, another challenge of this is that, yes, we do have historic mining in Virginia, and a lot of those mines lay abandoned across our Commonwealth. And so there is a cost to taxpayers to reclaim those sites. That's something that should be occurring, a reclamation of those, that especially sites that are leaking mercury. And so kind of compounding and adding to that threat and that problem is also a misguided step for the Commonwealth. So we need due diligence in reviewing outdated and insufficient regulations. We saw this process happening as part of the solution with HB 2213, which studies the effects of gold mining on the Commonwealth. And it's currently underway. This is a two-part study from the National Academy of Sciences and a state agency committee, which has a comment period open until October 28th, where you can weigh in with your thoughts about the potential of large-scale gold mining. So the solution is in the study. We have ways to take a holistic look at this industry. We can evaluate the existing bonding, reclamation, closure, and monitoring regulations to see if it's even feasible to have them to the scale that we need if this industry were to begin in Virginia. And we will be getting the results of the gold mine study by December 1st. So we can also review and react to that helpful piece of information. With this, there has been a lot of attention on gold because that was the first metal that was found out to be part of Aston Bay's search. But we also need to study and assess the impacts of copper, zinc, and lead. And while this is happening, we should pause the issuance of permits until that assessment, that study is complete. So we know localities do have the authority to ban this industry within their county at the county level, but at the state level, we also recommend for a policy this year banning the use of cyanide in any mining process. So lots of ways to look at both of these extractive industries that can and do bring harm to Virginia communities. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Jess. So we currently have one question related to this topic. It says, one effective way to discourage new mining, which is now being driven by increased electrification, is to require recycling of electronic devices, which are about 98% recoverable. Is there any interest in this in VA's policies or Virginia's policy space? Excuse me.
Yes, short answer, yes. I mean, I think one of the ways we're thinking too about the search for copper in Pittsylvania and Campbell counties is that it's more efficient to actually recover that metal through recycling. So I think as we're thinking about energy efficiency, material efficiency is a really great suggestion.
Awesome, I think. Not seeing any additional questions on this topic. I think I will move us right along to the next section.
Marissa, I don't know if you want to take time, but James had asked a question. I accidentally answered live, but if you want to move along, go ahead.
Yeah, so what I was thinking is we get to this next section. If there's still time, we can come back to that. I did see that, but I want to make sure we stay on time. So thank you.
I'll continue answering it typing.
Okay, sounds good. All right, moving to the next section, utility accountability. And in this section, we'll hear once again from Kendl Kobbervig with Clean Virginia about curbing electric utilities' political influence. And from Leah Jones with Virginia Interfaith Power and Light on ensuring access to essential services. And with that, I'll pass it to Kendl.
Thanks, Marissa. Okay, let me share my screen again. Okay. So folks will probably be happy to hear that this paper is a little easier to understand than my last one, but they are actually sort of inextricably linked because this paper, which is on curbing electric utilities, political influence, is actually really kind of getting to the root cause of why Virginia has so many kind of broken rate making laws and why our structure is so sort of unfairly stacked in the interest of utilities versus customers and energy affordability. So this paper was actually written by Clean Virginia's Deputy Director, Cassidy Craighill, but she cannot be here today, so I will be presenting on her behalf. So the challenge. So Virginia pretty consistently ranks at the bottom of the barrel when you look at national sort of comparisons of campaign finance laws, ethics laws, transparency. And what that has resulted in the energy space is a system where our utility monopolies, so again, Dominion Energy and Appalachian Power, are able to donate unlimited amounts of money to the elected officials who are supposed to regulate them. And in fact, Dominion is actually the largest corporate political donor in Virginia's history. And the kind of one unfortunate piece of that that's really important to mention is that the money that they're donating to elected officials is subsidized, of course, by our electric bills, right? Because we're the ones, that's how they make their money. So another important piece of this is that there are also no laws preventing legislators from owning stock in utility monopolies that they are, again, supposed to be regulating, which means that legislators are allowed to vote on bills that can increase their personal wealth or impact their personal wealth, which of course is, a pretty obvious conflict of interest. And what we've seen is that Dominion and Appalachian Power utilize the political influence that comes from, being some of the largest donors in the country or in the state to lobby against distributed and affordable clean energy like rooftop solar and against stronger oversight from regulators. So basically, there's this pretty severe imbalance between utilities and customers and how much power they have when it comes to legislators making decisions about our energy system. Fortunately, the solutions to this are actually pretty simple. Really, there's kind of two key ones, and they already exist in a lot of other states. Over half the country actually bans political contributions in some form, and 22 states ban corporate contributions altogether. So what we're asking for in Virginia is to ban members of the General Assembly from owning stock in any public investor-owned electric utility, and then also to prohibit public utility monopolies from contributing to political campaigns and committees of the government officials who are tasked with regulating them. And that's it. Pretty simple.
Thank you, Kendl. Pass it to Leah. Leah.
All right, thank you, Kendl and everyone. I'm about to pull it up right now. Okay, so hi everyone. Today I'm going to be talking to you all about ensuring access to essential services. So basically making sure that we are providing protections from Virginians from getting their utilities disconnected. And before diving into more details about this policy paper, huge props and huge thank you to all of the folks and authors who've been working on this. Emily Piontek from Appalachian Voices, Laura Gonzalez from Clean Virginia, and Joy Loving from Climate Action Alliance of the Valley. Thank you. So what are the challenges that we're seeing with utility affordability and utility disconnections protections here in Virginia? Access to energy and water utilities is, like we all know, essential for our health and well-being of everyone. Even though we know this is the case, clean water and the ability to light, heat, and cool our homes are not a guaranteed thing for vulnerable and low-income households here in Virginia. Virginia actually has 33 electric utilities, 8 gas utilities, and more than 50 water and wastewater utilities that each have its own consumer protections and disparate regulatory oversight. Some of these utilities are regulated by the SEC, and others are regulated by municipal governments. And so while this regulatory structure does provide utilities a lot of flexibility to serve the unique needs of different consumers throughout the state, it also means that it leaves a lot of vulnerable and low-income households unfairly subject to differing consumer protection policies. So directly, some of these challenges will look like Virginians facing high energy burdens. 75% of Virginia households spend more than 6% of their monthly income on energy bills. And Kendl mentioned earlier, a great point of just once again emphasizing the energy burden that Virginia households already have to deal with. In addition to that, we have some of the least consumer-friendly disconnection policies of any state in the Southeast, which is honestly a bit surprising. And in addition to that, we also pay some of the highest electric bills in the nation. So in addition to all these things as well, in 2021, we were actually able to pass in the General Assembly by resolution to recognize water as a human right. And even though the resolution itself states that disconnections are contrary to promoting public health and welfare, there are no bonding policies that specifically ensure water access, especially as it relates to disconnections. So all of these things and all of these challenges are, of course, worsened by the things that we see happening now, like inflation and the war in Ukraine. With energy prices basically skyrocketing to levels that we haven't seen since the oil crisis in the 1980s. So exacerbation of existing energy burdens or burdens all across the utilities really increases households' vulnerability to interruptions and access to these essential services. And in a real way can mean choosing between paying your power bill or paying for the groceries or medical care that you may need as well. So it's very imperative that we're addressing these inequalities that have been baked into our current system as we respond to the climate crisis. And we can start to find these solutions and model these solutions off of what we've seen some of our southeastern state neighbors doing in the past that have seemed to work. So just touching more now on the actual solutions to these challenges that we've seen, many of which have been successfully implemented in other states that I've mentioned across the Southeast, even like North Carolina, Kentucky, West Virginia, Maryland, Georgia, and even Alabama. These are all things that we can hopefully establish in Virginia. These include establishing utility disconnection policies for extreme weather or public health emergencies, and when vulnerable residents like those who are medically compromised or who are infants are at risk, and also just require that these disconnections are reported to the SCC, as well as limiting fees resulting from overdue bills. That's something that is hopefully, I think, makes a lot of sense. And in a lot of ways, it's like one of those things that is surprising that we don't have already. Issuing fees for people who can't pay their bills already doesn't make sense. So hopefully we can establish some solutions to limit those fees. In addition to that solution, we're hoping to require unregulated utilities to offer low-income payment plans that do not involve deposits or penalties like the late fees I just mentioned, or interest, or other eligibility criteria. Lastly, a policy solution that we're offering is to reform our electric rate structure overall and support energy efficiency measures for homeowners and renters. So by ultimately reducing water and energy burdens for the long term, we can ultimately guarantee access to what we know are vital services and ultimately promote public health in the long run, especially during times of crisis like we've seen in the past few years with the pandemic, COVID pandemic, and even all the other diseases we've seen pop up across the nation and even the globe. So those are the issues at hand, and those are some of the solutions we are offering. I just lastly wanted to offer some upcoming actions that folks can take just real quick, that will also be sure to have all the links in the following up resources from this education series today. We do have a petition in support of this, in support of these policies, as well as an upcoming town hall to learn more about disconnection protections, hopefully from the legislators themselves and people who have been particularly impacted by disconnections. So if you are interested also in sharing your own experiences or encouraging others to share their own personal experiences, we are really hoping to center those voices of those who have been impacted by utility disconnections themselves. So please be sure to reach out to us. And once again, all this info will be linked later. So thank you. I'm going to disconnect.
Thanks, Leah, and to all of our panelists today. I'm not currently seeing any questions in the Q&A. We can pause here for a beat to just make sure no one's trying to frantically type a question. But otherwise, I will say once again, thank you to all of our panelists, and I will pass it to Andrew. I think it's gonna wrap us up.
Yes, thank you very much, Narissa, and hello, everybody. And again, thank you to all of our panelists who spent the day with us. We heard some really phenomenal things, and we're just really excited to be able to be sharing the same space with you all. I'm going to close this up today with just some ways for folks to get involved in terms of an advocacy perspective. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Andrew Perot, and I'm the Civic Engagement and Outreach Manager with VCN. And so I have a few resources here that I would love to share with you really quick, just to help you get or stay engaged with plenty of different advocacy efforts that are happening within the state. So if you give me 1 second, I'm going to share my screen with y'all, and I'll go to a bit about what we have. Just bear with me for just a moment. Okay. So there's a few things statewide that are coming up that I would love to call your attention to. First thing, public commenting period on RGGI Defense is now open. We're hosting 2 in conjunction with several of our partners on October 19th at 5:30 and October 24th at noon. And this is an opportunity for you all to learn a bit more about how to write and engaging public comment. We have some really good workshop leaders that are going to be hosting this, following some breakout rooms, really great information. So strongly encourage you to join those. You'll be getting invitations to that shortly from our host partners. The second thing I would love to call your attention to, maybe the first time you've heard it this year, but certainly won't be the last, contact your legislators. That's going to be the #1 way you can advocate for the positions and policies that you care about. So if there was anything today that you heard that particularly resonated with you, give your senator or delegate a call. Let them know what you care about. They want to hear from you. If you're not sure who your legislator is, you can check out this site here, who'smy.virginiageneralassembly.gov. Enter in your address, your zip code, and it'll come up with all of your representatives. So I would highly encourage you to take that out. The last thing that I'd like to show you, and I'm just going to switch screens for a bit, is how to download copies of our common agenda and our advocacy guide. So if you bear with me for just 1 more second, we are going to here. Let me stop sharing for 1 moment. And I'm going to show you all, if you don't already know, how to get involved with our website here. So go back to screen share. Okay, so if you just Google Virginia Conservation Network here, there are 2 things you can do. On our main page here, you can go to our Common Agenda Briefing Book, which will take you to this link here. Download your full PDF of the entire Common Agenda, or if you would like to just find a specific item, you can go to any one of our subsections here, take a look. Here's one on trails and parks. Internet's a little slow today. PDF download. That's the first thing that you can do. And you can do these for any of these chapters here. Secondly, if you go to our Take Action page, you can find, scrolling down a bit towards the middle of the page here, several PDF guides on how to stay involved virtually through civic engagement, finding out how to get involved with the General Assembly, and our Media for Action guide here. We're actually updating this, and there will be a few more specific items that folks can take that you'll see examples of within the coming months. So take a look, make sure you take a look there. I'm going to stop my screen sharing there. I just wanted to say again, thank you all so much for your participation today. If there's anything directly that you'd like to contact me about on how to get involved in any of these advocacy efforts that I just mentioned, you can email me directly, and that's just my first name, Andrew, and that's at vcnva.org. Thanks again. I appreciate y'all's time.